One.
And we're live!
Woo! Woo!
How are you all doing? We're live. There's the second live sign. I'm never sure if it's that live sign or that live sign that means that we're live. But welcome to yet another edition of SPSM. So excited tonight because we have a lot going on. So I'm at Doc Foreman, one of your friendly moderators. You can tweet me at Doc Foreman. And of course, if you are following from YouTube today, reminder that if you go to SPSM Chat on Facebook, you can like the Facebook page and you can get updates about related content, such as the cool YouTube video from our guest, Dr. Lyle Unger, tonight, and you can get notification of new events as we post them. This is going to be really important come summer because we are rounding out at the last half at the end of the spring season of Season 3. I know, that was a lot, but we really only have a few weeks left until we go on summer hiatus. What that means is that you need to like the SPSM page because a whole bunch of SPSMers are going to be creating fabulous summer content. And in order for you to get an alert about when that might be, you'll either need to be checking Twitter every day or just hitting that little like button on Facebook. I'm so excited to be here because a whole bunch of stuff is coming, and we will talk a little bit at the end of the chat about hashtag VA Brain Trust and hashtag Zero Suicide that you need to follow this week. But before we get to all of that, we should do the show. And I want to introduce you to our IT guy, Mr. Tony Wood.
Howdy, everybody. At HWWW, should you have any questions for our guests? Otherwise, take it away, Bart.
Tony, the way you said that, I'm not sure you're actually interested in getting any questions from our audience tonight. There was a little. How are you doing?
Subtle. It wasn't.
How's your energy? How's your energy?
It could be better. I'll go get some coffee while you guys say whatever it is you say right now.
Well, hold on. I was just watching the Dow Monfils replay. Hold on. Let me break from that. So yeah, that's very important in my life. Welcome to the show. You can reach me at Bart Andrews. I'm on Twitter a little bit. In real life, my name is Dr. Bart Andrews. I'm the Vice President of Clinical Practice and Evaluation at Behavioral Health Response, and that really is a mouthful of a title. I am really excited about the show tonight. We got to see an amazing TED Talk today in preparation for the show, and this man is phenomenal. And so I'm excited. You guys are going to learn a ton and enjoy the show. And April, take it away.
So we're really excited. I know that we have done a series of data science style SPSM chats this spring, but of course there have been all these great White House hackathons, and there's more events coming up, such as hashtag VA Brain Trust, and we want you to we want to ensure that our SPSM community is not only aware that data science exists and that it can help us in suicide prevention, but understand different ways. So we talked very recently with Craig Bryan about how we could use someone's Facebook data to predict within 6 months, 1 month, a week, a day, like not only if John's going to die by suicide, but what day is John going to die by suicide. That's really what we worked on. And then someone asked, is tonight's guest going to just basically talk about the same thing? But this is Dr. Lyle Unger, who's going to introduce himself momentarily. And the thing that you have to keep in mind is that Lyle is talking about looking at a lot of data points. Like at one point, he talked about a data set that was 1 billion, like, tweets or some ridiculous amount of data to understand population health. And he's going to tell us how looking at a community's social media might be able to tell us something about their mental health and their suicide risk. And without any further ado, I'm going to introduce Dr. Lyle Unger.
Hey, great to be here. So I'm Lyle Unger. I'm a professor of computer science at the University of Pennsylvania. And I look at Twitter and Facebook, if people will share it with me, to try and understand, well, whatever I can learn about people, who they are, what they care about, what their mental health is, what their physical health is, and all these things tie together. When people tweet or post, they leak a lot of information about who they are and what they care about.
Now that's,
and we've got a big group at Penn.
Yeah. Anything.
You don't leak anything? You don't sound like a female as opposed to a male? You don't sound like an extrovert? You don't sound bubbly? You don't sound enthusiastic? Nah.
Right, Dr. Unger.
I'm sure you come across like a 12-year-old boy, right? Oh, 13. I'm sorry. You can't be 12-year-old on Facebook. It's illegal. 13-year-old boy.
No, can I tell you really quickly? Dr. Christy Hollingshead Sites on the little SPSIM chat monitored some of our posts on our chat and was telling us what our language said about our age and gender, and I think it was like a 31-year-old man or something. It was pretty great. Anyway, go ahead.
Cool. So that's it. There's a bunch of us at Penn, a mix of psychologists, computer scientists, doctors, trying to really look at social media to see how to understand individuals and communities. And one of the cool things is that communities have personalities just like people do. They're supportive, or they're nasty, they're engaged, or they're bored. And it sort of percolates up and down. People make each other feel better or worse. And it's something you can watch across the Twitter sphere.
Okay, just a second. I want to make sure that I understand this right. So what you're telling me is that we can look at a community's language, like all the tweets in like a geolocated area, and we can sort of know the personality of a community. I mean, we all sort of said that, like, this city has this kind of personality, or this city has that kind of personality. But you're saying you can actually observe that.
Yes, some are friendlier, some are nastier. Of course, some are richer and some are poorer. Language differs across how much money. But we found rather surprisingly that you can predict mortality from arteriosclerotic heart disease, or hardening the arteries, from Twitter better than you can from who's smoking and how many people are smoking, how many people are obese, how many people are older or younger, male or female, black or white.
Why isn't the CDC doing this then?
Fairly new work. And I think in some sense the goal is not to predict it. They know who died. That's not what they're trying to predict. The question is, what is it about the community that causes people to be healthier or happier or less healthy? And so predicting who died last year is not very surprising. We have that from the hospitals. But what is it about the community? And there we find the obvious things that correlate with education and good jobs. But also if your communities are engaged and more positive and more excited and more dealing with challenges, then people are healthier than if they're bored and tired and swearing at each other.
Now, we only swear at each other in love.
Okay.
Can you do us a favor and tell us a little bit about where your degree is, where you're from, and some of the research that's got you to this place?
Oh, that's the long and bizarre story. I'm trained as a chemical engineer. No. Yeah. I guess I was sort of an applied mathematician. I looked at how metals solidify, the interface between the melts and the solid. I've done all sorts of weird things, but I got interested in understanding language. And language is mostly used in business for finding what products people buy, who likes what do they buy because they what. But that didn't sound like English. But in fact, when people communicate, they're mostly not just saying facts, but trying to form bonds. They're making connections. They're saying how they're feeling, either directly or indirectly. And I got very interested in this process of how can one take people's language and then correlate it with how much empathy they have, how much psychopathy they have, how good their relationships are. Everything pretty much about life sort of comes out if you have enough language, what people are talking and who they're talking to.
Mm-hmm.
So, Bart, what are you thinking? Because you learned a lot about language today. You were tearing it up.
Well, I think that one of the things, Miles talking about community and language and how those two things interplay with one another. And just being at AAS, I think we all felt a bit of a paradigm shift in that everybody's starting to take a step back, and traditionally we've been focused on identifying people at risk of suicide, targeting them, and intervening with these individuals. Like there was something wrong with that person. Inside them. And I think more and more we're taking a step back and we're looking at how the community and the environment plays a role in driving suicide behavior and suicide thinking and depression and health, and all these things are connected. And one of the things that looking at Lyle's data and his TED Talk, when you think about public wellness, suicide really is one of the key benchmarks, right? I mean, when you think globally about an indication of wellness, a community's experience with suicide tells us a lot about wellness, and we can tell a lot about a community by their language, right? And so things I'm really curious about in the talk, Lyle talked about how language is contagious and that communities influence each other by language. And we know that Facebook did some experiments and altered people's feeds, and it changed their mood. And although that was evil and horrible and wrong, and they shouldn't do that, I'm really glad they did, because it's so cool. So those are things that I'm really interested in. So I'd love to hear Lyle's thoughts on using language at a community level to alter environment, or what can at least language tell us about what we should do.
Well, I think, first of all, Facebook and all those companies are always manipulating. They have different feeds. That's also true of CNN or Fox, or whatever you're reading is providing some sort of a feed to you. And that feed, of course, influences you, right? We know there are copycat suicides if there's more information. We know that, as Facebook showed, if you get more positive feedback from your friends, you're a little happier. And we also know recently that there's not just overt direct suicide, but there's also a lot of people who are overdosing from opioids, a lot of people drinking themselves to death, that particularly in communities where people are having trouble finding jobs, where they're feeling that life is not as good as it was for their parents' generation, where they're feeling that life is just not what it should be, that people start doing a little bit more drugs, and there's a sort of continuum. And I do think that you can see that, you can feel that. There's a lot there. So
this actually sounds really similar, and one of the reasons that we're interested in your work, and we apologize to keep interrupting, but we're
no, please, I like being interrupted.
So
you're in the right place. You are in the right place.
In Canada, a couple of weeks back, they had a First Nation community where they had a cluster of suicides, and then again nearby, another First Nation community had a cluster of suicides and suicide attempts, like sort of all at once. When they asked some of the youth to come to community center and talk about what they needed to prevent suicide, they did talk about counselors, but they did things like, we need sports teams, and we need and things like that, and they said, we're in despair because of lack of resources in our community, which is not necessarily what we talk about in individual therapy. Like, there is no, what is your community sports program like when I'm doing suicide risk assessment? So what are we learning about suicide and mental health and mental well-being from language?
Well, so I've looked a lot at personality, which is not the same as mental health, but correlates, and looking at what characterizes people who are neurotic or well-adjusted. And yeah, actually, show at some point. I've got beautiful word slides of the words that people. Should I try pulling those up?
Why don't you do that and show us?
Let's
show some of those pictures. Let's see if I can grab a screen share here and see. Let's just pull a few of these. It's a little background. Let me give you a little game here just to start, okay? So I picked out 3 tweets from 3 different locations just to show they have different personalities. Now these are all across America, so we're a little American biased here, sorry. New York, Birmingham, and Seattle. Okay? So New York, Alabama, and Washington State. Which would this one be? Jesus suffered for love so we could find love in our suffering?
Birmingham.
I'm saying Birmingham.
Birmingham. Cliff Bars and coffee in the morning. Mint cocoa, cool mint coffee. Today just might be good.
Seattle.
Seattle. And Grindr, singers, rappers, marketing gurus. We're in Brooklyn,
New York.
Right?
Yeah.
New York. So you see something of pieces there, but you also see religion, you see positivity, you see negativity, all that stuff. I'll show a couple of the flavor of it. So I'll show you about, we'll get back to suicide and neuroticism in a second, but I want to sort of set the stage here. These are the words that most distinguish females from males. And the brighter the color, the reds are things that are more frequent, and the bigger ones are more indicative. What are the girls saying? Love you, excited, shopping, so with 4 O's, with 5 O's, I miss.
I don't think that's
that screen's not showing, Lyle.
Not showing? Oh no.
Down on
That's no good.
You got to scroll. Yeah, click on the. We're still seeing the New York, the 3 tweets, 3 different locations.
That's
Yay, we got it.
Ladybirds.
That's
Tiger
bizarre.
blood.
That's bizarre. Okay, it's a little cliche. I'm sort of embarrassed. But
more importantly, you didn't pick this. The computer picked this.
Well, yeah, we have 70,000 people who told us were they male or female, and they shared their Facebook, and the computer pulled the words that are most distinctive. Now, most words look the same, the, and, or, with, from, but a lot of them are different. Okay, so females, males, we're going to get to neurotics and suicide in a second here, but let's see if we can actually, is this screen share working? Males, oh, sorry, swear words.
I don't know what the fuck you're talking about, Dr. Unger.
We don't use words like that. Okay.
Treat this right.
But getting away from boys and girls, it's sort of embarrassing to be a boy there. Neurotics. What's it like to be neurotic? Neuroticism correlates with depression. Neurotics are increased risk for suicide. This is not a fun life, right? These are people who are sick of things. They don't say depression or depressed very much, but if they do it, it's highly indicative. I hate, worse, bloody, my head. Okay, this is not surprising to my psychologist collaborators, but what's really interesting to me, and now we're getting closer to the community, is what anti-neurotic or well-adjusted people say about. They talk about what? Basketball, volleyball, sports, and the Lord, religion.
And the beach, chilling at the beach.
And chilling at the beach. The interesting thing is that the sports are some that you do, like snowboarding, and I don't know about soccer or basketball. It's some that you watch, right? These are not people who are playing for the Celtics. They're Lakers. So what you see is, in fact, that people who are well-adjusted are talking a lot about sports and religion. That's sort of a big piece of their life, something one can do. And now I can pull the whole thing sort of full circle, and then I'll open up for more back to you questions. I've shown here, hopefully it shows up, on the top that same well-adjusted words, and then looking at sets of words that show up in counties, U.S. counties that have less suicide. And here's the sort of amazing thing. Counties with lower suicide talk more about basketball and football and the Yankees and the Sox and the Giants. That there are counties that are lesser, they're talking more about sports. And I always wonder, maybe we should be prescribing. I've never seen a doctor say, hey, you look sort of depressed. Why don't you go and watch some sports with your buddies? Why don't you do something and have some fun?
So
let's see if I can.
Do we have like suicide rates? And I don't know this about like by who like wins the World Series or something. Like if your town wins the World Series, does the suicide rate drop in that city?
That's a good question. I don't know that it happens often enough to have good statistics, so I haven't seen anything either way.
Once a year.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I was thinking when I was looking at the word clouds earlier a while is both with church and with sports. On the surface, that's one thing, but that also means connection to community. So sports fans feel a sense of belonging. They're connecting. They're talking to each other about their team. Same thing with faith. So when we look at these word clouds, the sports seems very misleading, but you realize there's a community element there. That's really, these are people who are connecting, and that's why they're so engaged and they're talking about this, right? They're a part of something.
That's precisely my interpretation. If you look at it, people who are religious are happier. They're mostly healthier, a little bit heavier and more prone to diabetes, but in general they're better off. And I think community is central and key to these. And this is very American-centric. Other countries in Europe are not as religious. They have other forms of community. I think everybody's into sports. I mean, that's sort of a universal piece. But I think it's a key question. How can one promote community? I was talking to this guy, Dan Buettner, who does Blue Zones. He's got a very interesting intervention.
Yeah.
He goes into communities and tries to change the whole community. He says, forget treating people too hard. Go in, try and change health by making more healthy food around the restaurants, but more importantly, form people into groups. Find 4 couples, contract to get together once a week for dinner. Contract to go on a walk. Tries to build more pedestrian zones or footpaths or something, but mostly tries to build more community. Establish bingo games, establish local charities for people to work for, but don't try to change one person. Say, oh, look she's depressed, let me help her. Yeah. Great, but even better, make a community that says, look this is a place where we as a community agree that what we're going to do is get together more often, We're going to walk together. We're going to have dinner together. We're going to play bingo together. Not expensive things, but community-oriented. I love the approach. We're starting to monitor. We're going to monitor Twitter and see what effect it has. Yep. Sorry,
Dr.
April.
just tweeted that Thomas Trainer did look at the data, and cities post-championship wins do have lower suicide rates. Just so that you
Oh, that's great.
Did you get a little SPSMer there? It's pretty great.
I love it. I love it. I love it. That's great. So everybody should make sure they win the sports championships.
It's worth it.
Oh, that's hard.
Invest in the draft for public health.
That was an interesting word that men used more than women, was wishes, right? There was on one of the word clouds, men used the word wishes a lot more, which I thought was really interesting.
Was it wishes or wishes he?
Oh, was it wishes he? Is that what it is? It was a phrase.
I think
wishes.
it may have been the phrase that wishes he. So some of them are subtle differences because the women tend to talk about both them. So it's like for husband or boyfriend, women talk about my husband and your husband, her husband, his husband. Well, that less often, but some. But more talking about both other people and themselves. The men tend to be more hanging out with men, talking with men more. So talking less about other people's girlfriends, talking less about women a little bit. So there's a little asymmetry there. The women tend to have a little more gender balanced set of friends. And so maybe you're picking up less on the wishing and more on the he versus she.
Ah, interesting.
So
Very
it is
cool.
odd because women are both better often at maintaining relationships, but of course much more prone to depression, right? 4 times the rate where men. Much less good, I think. Yep.
Die by suicide.
Well, much less effective yes. Certainly less effective at carrying through. So.
Fine.
Yeah.
It's okay with you?
Yeah, we got a great question live when we were looking at the data on persons who show more neuroticism. Or I'm assuming maybe some communities have more neuroticism than other communities. Is that fair to say? And is there
it varies. It varies regionally. Absolutely.
And so is there a self-selection process going on? So that was a question from Mark Demore. So in other words, are people gravitating towards like minds, or are there just communities that have this vibe, and so you could go there and be a little more positive, but you end up in a more neurotic community and you in fact become slightly more neurotic by being there?
That's a good question, which we haven't really been able to get good data on. I think the communities tend to actually really have personalities. You see, for example, the Mormons are very agreeable, Latter-day Saints. They're just sort of more of a positive vibe. And not just they don't swear, but they really are. So there are cultures of communities that differ. The Northeast, where I am, is just a little more intense. People are, I'm busy, need to get that happened. A little less chill, a little less relaxed. And sure, people self-select. You're coming from overseas or you're looking where to move, you're going to look to some place that's a little more your style, right? If you're gay, you're going to go to a community that's more gay-friendly, not one that's homophobic. If you're really aggressive trying to do things, you're looking for a more aggressive set of people to hang out with. So it's sort of a little bit like a fraternity. There is some selection there. Absolutely.
Cool, thank you.
So we may be picking places to live and staying in places to live like us and like our level of health. So we do have research about relationships that shows that people who gravitate towards relationships, there's a little bit of balance in mental health and mental wellness. And relationships tend to be less stable when one person gets healthier or one person gets sicker. So it may be that if you begin to not fit a place, you leave. So you may be healthier than the place that you are, and you're just like, I can't stay here. There's better opportunity. Or you may not fit and feel like you need, I'm not being successful here, and so I need to go be somewhere else. So there is something like that may be happening. May not be causal.
No. It's hard to say which way it goes, but I have no data, but my guess is there's a lot of self-selection. People want to go. You feel like a New Yorker. You want to be in New York. Other people I know in New York think, hey, this is too fast, too stressed. I want to go out in the country. I don't enjoy this. I want to be out in Lancaster or Freda, somewhere out in the countryside with the Amish chilling. So absolutely different cultures.
I don't think the Amish chill, but that's I'm not sure.
I don't know. I haven't talked to them, but they don't seem to be rushing quite as strenuously trying to make the extra buck as some of the people I know in Manhattan.
We'd ask them on the live stream, but that may be culturally insensitive.
Yeah, right.
That might be. You've just said that an entire group of people, based on their affiliation, don't chill, but you're worried at this point about being offensive. No, it's fine. Let's proceed.
We really do.
We just lost the Amish, the whole Amish group, the whole SPSM Amish contingent. They're out. That's advertiser dollars out the window, Foreman.
This is one of those moments where we have to talk about, this is what the data says, we're dealing in large generalities, we don't need to be insensitive or to be like overly binary about gender, all those things. And at the same time, we're talking about looking at billions of points of data and trying to sort of distill it down. And so this is sort of the state of where it is right now. But for example, could you tell, one of the questions that we were talking about at AAS 16 at one of the powwows that Tony and I were in, I think with Glenn, was could we? I found out, Lyle, and I don't know if you probably don't know this, but no one has ever actually measured if communities that have higher homophobia also have higher suicides in the LGBTQ community. Could you actually measure using language? Like, could you geolocate? Which communities have more homophobia?
Probably. What people have looked is communities that have more racism.
Ooh.
And the claim is that the African Americans in communities with more racism, controlling for, very important, for education and income, are less healthy. So the claim is that one can, in fact, do these sort of Twitter-based measures of, in this case, racism, and that it does actually correlate with and presumably cause, although no experiments have been done, cause health problems. So it would not surprise me at all. That'd be really interesting. Or transgender, for that matter, these days, which is
very important, because we know that nearly half of folks who are transgendered attempt suicide. It's like very, very high risk population. And then we've got communities right now who are actively pursuing legislation that is harmful to people who are transgendered or harmful to people in the LGBTQ community. And so one of the things that would be important to some public health folks is to say, well, does a change in the tolerated, systematized homophobia, like do we notice a change in the community, and then does that impact well-being?
I think it probably does, and I think it should be measurable. The trick is you have to control for, obviously, a place like San Francisco that's both more LGBT-friendly and much wealthier, more educated, is going to have very different suicide rates than communities that are poor, lacking jobs. But I think it would be measurable and certainly worth looking at. I like the idea.
We like the idea too, if we can do it.
I think she's hinting, Lyle, that she wants somebody to do research like that. I don't know. I'm not good with the subtle.
Yeah, I noticed that subtle sort of vague piece there.
I'm so indirect and shy.
So Lyle, I'm hearing. Did you develop this tool that Christy Hollingshead uses to kind of ascertain gender and age from Twitter feeds? Was that your work?
I don't know if she's using ours or not. There's a bunch of them out there. She's probably using ours. She's certainly in the broad sense a collaborator. We share stuff out to the community. But to be honest, I'm not positive whether she's using the exact same one that we did or not. But probably the data set we have, which is 70,000 people, is relatively big in terms of having good measures particularly for Facebook and for personality. So that one's the best out there. For Twitter, it's not too hard. It says lots of tweets. I have 10 billion, not just 1 billion, but 10 billion tweets. So there are plenty of tweets out there, and they're effectively public.
Chatting about just having like 700 data sets, or we were just chatting like where you did where you had 70,000 people opt in with their Facebook things, and then you're talking about data sets 10 billion units of language.
Wow.
Yeah, but the trick with the tweets, you could get the profiles, but you don't know as much about them. So Facebook is much more valuable in some sense because you can actually tell, well, a lot. It's pretty easy to tell people are gay or straight, black or white, male or female. And so you get a lot of profiles about people from the Facebook is a lot of revelation, but those are only given by people who actually overtly share. So Facebook is fundamentally mostly private. Unless somebody says, yes, I will share my Facebook with you, we don't take it.
This brings us very tidily to our next sort of topic of discussion. So this is fascinating research that has sort of touched on the edge of understanding suicide rates and being able to look at population health, like either by a geolocated population or within like a special population group that's at risk, like folks who are transgendered. But in fact, that research really hasn't been done a lot yet. What are some of the problems that have to be solved, or what are some of the unique challenges of getting this data so we can do this research?
Well, it's fairly easy to get community-level data. It's fairly hard to get individual-level data. So I would love to have the Facebook posts, the Twitter streams of a bunch of people who've committed suicide. I wish they wouldn't, but if they have, I'd love to get a hold of their social media and compare that to similar people who haven't. Eventually say, can we see what's different there?
So could, for example, could people, I don't know, donate the Facebook profiles and Facebook data of their loved one who died by suicide to a researcher like you, and they could do something valuable with that?
That would be really useful, right? To know what were the events that led up to. Are there certain triggers that one can see? Are there warnings that become clearer? So I think certainly, I mean, the tweets, of course, are public, but the Facebook is not. If people would share it, that would be useful. Again, knowing more about people, or to have. I would love to have a big collection of transgender language. I don't know of any communities that have shared that, but that would be something that's interesting to look at a particular community.
Have we introduced you to SBSM alums Greta Gustava and her wife Nita Chauvel?
No.
Would you like us to?
If they have lots of data. I'm always looking for data. That's it.
Sorry.
I mean, one of the things we've been looking at is I've got these very cliche male-female, as if people were purely binary, whereas people, in fact, have a masculinity. We're collecting, finally, masculinity, femininity subscales to ask people questions, but it's slow and hard to collect the data. So a lot of what I'm limited by is actually getting data. It's easy to get words, but it's hard to get the words tied to who said them, knowing something about them, about their mental health, about their orientations, about their problems.
Oh, so maybe I'm crazy here. But if there were people who wanted you to have this data, and they went just a little trouble to talk with you about how to get it, would that be something your lab would be interested in?
Absolutely. Yeah, we're always looking for good data, which is going to we're trying to make the world a better place. I'm the Positive Psychology Center. We're the World Wellbeing Project. That's sort of our mission, is to try and help make people more positive.
Right? You're like a legitimate researcher. You have good bona fides. The World Wellbeing Project is well known. You're doing work that people with a very particular mission. So, like, people could, for example, work with you to collect information in a way that's harmonious with your IRB and say, we are really interested in solving this problem with our community. Would you collaborate with us to do a research study? And if they could figure out how to get you a data set, that's just really likely.
It'd be great. We've already got 2,000 people who shared their Facebook posts and their full medical record. We're going into pregnancy clinics. Of course, women are at risk for depression.
You have Facebook posts and a medical record, and people just gave you that?
Yeah. Well, in the hospital, there's a huge trust. You come to our emergency room, you get triage, you're sitting there, a nice person in a white coat who has an iPad with your full medical record goes on, excuse me, and I see you've been triaged for this. Do you use social media? Would you be willing to donate your Facebook? You'd have to log in here and share with us and let it correlate it. And most people who use social media, not everybody does, it's hard to believe it, but not everyone uses Facebook or Twitter, but those who do are mostly willing to share. That people, by and large, if they can trust someone, which is the case in the hospital, if they can make the world better, they're happy to share their social media. I find people are quite good.
will say yes?
Yep, they log in the iPad, they type in their password, which we don't keep, and they let us download their full history of their Facebook.
And how many people say yes? What percentage of people opt in?
Of the ones who have social media, something like 80%, 85%. Vast majority.
And once again, I mean, pardon me for saying the obvious, but you're telling me people who are in the middle of trying to get well, overwhelmingly, the majority of them, 80 to 85% of them, want you to have data to better understand the problems that they're having so that they can get better care and that they can help their friends or the members of their community who are coming behind them. They want to have it.
No better care for them. There's nothing in it for them. It's purely pro-social. They want to make the world a better place. May help them, sure. Maybe in 3 years, 5 years. But I don't. It's a charitable act. It's something people can do to help the world. More and more data is money. We know that Google and Facebook, well, Yahoo not so well anymore, Microsoft, I mean, these companies make vast amounts by getting people's data, and they get something back in return. You get your Gmail, and it's nice. But it's rare that people get offered the chance to really share their data for the public good. And most people are quite happy as long as they trust you're not going to go out there and spew it across the web or, do something
I'll share my
inappropriate
data
with it.
for a free shipping coupon.
There we go. Right.
So I do have a question for you from the Twitter feed. Stop Texas Suicides, who is someone from the state of Texas's Suicide Prevention Coalition, asks us, Linda Sullivan, I hope, let's be very clear that I mess up people's names constantly because of things in me. But she said, Tony, is this something that local suicide prevention coalitions could provide? Is there something that they could provide to support, or is this something local suicide prevention coalitions could provide support to collect social media Facebook data? Basically, she's saying, can state coalitions help you with this?
That's an interesting idea. I think probably the answer is yes. Certainly some of them have started to provide, they keep call records, and they're interested in helping to get more automated analyses of what's going on, what call questions can be triaged in different ways. So that's already starting to be shared, and I think that is sort of the right sort of outreach to get these suicide prevention places, to get people who are at risk to share, right? Don't wait till after a suicide. Get people who are there. It's hard because it's a feeling of trust. It's a hard time. You don't want to take advantage of people. You want them to feel that this is something they can do with no pressure. But I do think it's a good way to reach out to people.
I will tell you, interestingly enough, and this is something that we learned from one of our other SPSM guests at the beginning of this spring season, Glenn Moriarty was saying that when he was running a social media platform for peers to provide supportive chat conversations for others, that people who got support, if you put a button like how you can be there for others, like get the training and do this for others, overwhelmingly people wanted to volunteer and that made them feel better. So there is something about the altruistic thing of my data might help for people who are not doing well that actually does make them feel better. And you even talked about even just like donating small amounts of money improves well-being.
Yeah.
It could even be that the act of donating the data is beneficial, right?
I think people do. I think that's true. Giving something up is a great way to feel better, and it's amazing how many depressed people said, I was terrible, but I managed to spend more time helping other people, and it helped me. Actually, we're working a little bit with an interesting startup called Coco, which is a peer-to-peer counseling.
Talk a little more about that.
And one of the findings that the guy running it claims is he looked at people helping others, peer-to-peer counseling, helping people reframe their problems, more benefit to the people giving advice than to the people receiving it.
Yeah.
So,
Lila,
yep.
that's so important, Lila, because I think you know wellness, and we've been so focused on an illness model, right? And treating people like they're sick, and we need to do this for you, and you can't do it on your own. But when we treat people like they have something to offer, and when people get the chance to contribute, that improves their mood and it helps them get better. And I think more and more these are the things that we need to be talking about. People need to feel valued and have purpose in their lives, and this is the sort of thing you're talking about.
Absolutely, it's part of the problem that makes people depressed is lack of agency, lack of control. I'm worthless. I can't do anything. And one can look at the negative side, which is there. The positive side is you have experience, you've been there, you can actually help people and give something. And exactly as you say, the very act of helping others, I'm not powerless. I really can help someone. I can give them good advice. I can make them feel better. That's a huge contribution to feel better yourself. And all the studies show trying to feel happier, not productive. That's not the right way to go about it. You want to feel happier, find someone to help and spend the time helping them. You don't think yourself out of misery. You do it by actually reaching out and helping others. And I think that message does not get across enough.
And this isn't like your personal feeling about this. This is what research is finding, and it's like a fairly robust research finding, if I recall correct.
There have been a bunch of studies of the same form of go out, help someone, and a bunch of self-help platforms, and they're all finding pretty much the same thing, that what's good, gratitude, be thankful for your life, be thankful for what you have, and go out, help others, engage, do something that makes the world better, and it makes sense when you think about it, but it's not the first thing many people think of.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, Andy Brown was just commenting that when we look at the AA model, which was like the first peer support program, if you think about it, the whole concept of sponsorship is you're not sponsoring people to help them, although that's a byproduct. You have to sponsor people for your own sobriety, that it's helping others that is really what engenders that sense of connection to life and recovery.
Yeah, I think it's a double benefit because I think it's much easier to give advice to other people, recognize, help them put their life in perspective than to put your own life in perspective. So I think partly there's a cognitive aspect that as you're helping others, you're saying, oh yeah, I always love it. How to figure out how to give good advice? What would you tell your best friend if she were having the problems you were having? That perspective helps you to view it. And then the sheer helping, the sheer being able to help makes a difference.
So, and we could even, like, that's something that could be measured. So we may be able to measure depression and, like, sort of psychic versus, like, well-being. And we could look at communities that have greater levels of psychic versus greater levels of well-being. And we could look at things that are done, like, here's what I think is really interesting about your work, and this is just me. But the CDC puts out information about communities, but the data is often a couple of years old. And so if I want to deploy a large-scale population intervention, it's hard for me to prove, if I'm writing a grant or trying to get dollars to get that done, it's hard for me to prove that it has an impact. But if, for example, we were doing like sort of A/B testing or baseline where we said we're going to use this lingual sort of analysis to sort of measure our community's baseline well-being, then we're going to deploy a community intervention, then we're going to measure it again, and we could even take it away. We could say, yeah, I mean, because that's experimentally very solid. And you're saying, like, setting that kind of analysis up would be relatively straightforward and a great way to test and see which types of community interventions are effective in your community for raising your well-being and possibly lowering your suicide rate.
Yeah, the intervention's the hard part. The measurement with Twitter or Facebook is much cheaper, and as you say, very fast.
They think the measurement's the hard part.
Well, I personally hate filling out questionnaires. So I do not like these sort of, someone calls me, even the U.S. government, well, I guess I do the census, but that's about the only, I don't want to fill out questionnaires.
Me neither.
But I am willing to, but I'm willing to let people monitor my Facebook as long as it's for something that's a reasonable cause. Again, there's some privacy concerns. You want to have people you trust. But I think it's good. I think it's also important to know that communities exist both in a geographic region, which is the most important, but they're also online communities. And so one could potentially have interventions and measurements within a purely online community where people increasingly have sets of friends that they spend lots of time on.
I will tell you that we got a tweet from Tom Cruise, not the Tom Cruise, but our Tom Cruise, who is a veteran. And he says veterans are great at this, like the I got your six, which is like the 6 o'clock, I got your back. The veterans will help each other, and that esprit de corps really is important for, that they'll help someone else stay alive or through a really tough situation, and they'll go out of their way to do it even if they don't know it. And that is really important in the military community. And I think that when you mentioned, for example, the Latter-day Saint community, they're very communal. So they have a really, really strong sense of we will take care of the members of our congregation, and they really look out for each other. So that kind of behavior we think might be really robust in keeping people alive and in preventing mental sickness.
I think it's great, and the question for me then is, how do I get that in non-religious communities? Now, certainly the military has been very good, but there's a lot of training, there's a lot of effort that goes into forming that.
Mm-hmm.
And how to bring that to other communities, I think, is an open question, but one that I think is totally critical.
Yeah, you were talking about things like walking paths and stuff like that. Here in Baton Rouge, where I live, I happen to know the Parks and Rec superintendent. She's a friend of mine. She's a veteran, by the way. She's totally fabulous.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that she committed to was bringing more walking paths and bringing more recreational experiences into all of the neighborhoods so that everyone, regardless of socioeconomic status, has a quality recreational experience nearby, and they can run into their neighbors and be out walking. And I will say, everyone I know utilizes a lot of the community recreational stuff here in town. It's fabulous. So you do go to a lot of events and run into people. I think things like that do make a difference. But what Carolyn McKnight's problem is that she gets a lot of money to do these really big projects. She really doesn't have good data on, I implemented this and it opened and it's changed. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, that I think makes complete sense. And there one should be able to measure both people talking about it, people talking about meeting friends. We certainly see in social media there's a lot of communication about going out to meet some friends, having dinner with friends. It's interesting, for example, I look at conscientious people. I see both people talking about working, but also about weekends and dinner with friends, and there's this balanced life that comes across when you look at someone who is well-adjusted and shows through their social media. It's not just drinking and partying, and it's not just working, but there's this communitarian aspect of being together. Definitely measurable, and definitely, we're starting to say with Dan Buettner's communities do the before after.
Definitely measurable.
Measurable. I'm a scientist. Measure everything, right?
Bart, you had a couple things.
Well, I just love what Lyle's talking about, and I think there's this trend going on. Assessment was a special demand for years, and everybody loves to look at personality data. But when you look at even the best personality instruments, if you can explain 30% of the variance in behavior with a really good instrument, you're doing pretty damn good, right? That's pretty
totally
good.
Right. All you get. Not much
it's
there.
All you get. And so, one of my professors used to say that personality assessment is really about how people load on how they report their personality, right? So what we're really assessing with personality measures is how people view themselves and that static sense of themselves, not actually how they behave. And that's why we get these really low validity coefficients. We're not able to predict behavior very well from personality measures because it's just how people view themselves. The sort of data that you're getting at is not just people how they view themselves, it's their actual behavior. We can see their personality in real time and how they're actually behaving. So that error variance now is really the stuff the meat of it, right? And I think that's key. It's key, right?
It's both who people are, but it's also what they do, what their environment. So people always sort of overweight personality.
Yeah.
And underweight the importance of the situation. There's a classic study where they took a bunch of religious students, seminary students, and told them they would go to give a lecture, and they walked past someone who was an actor who was clearly in need. And the question is, do these reverends in training stop and help the poor person? And the answer is, if they were late to give their talk, no. And if they had time, yes.
And this is classic social psychology.
Classic social psychology. And so, is your personality to be friendly or outgoing? Well, that's important. But more important is, are you bumping into people? Are you agreed? Is there a place for kids to get together for sports after school? Is that the expected thing that people do, is hang out at the gym? Or is the expected thing to do that they're going and shooting up? So personality is not, it's important, but it's not as important as the environment. And the nice thing about social media is that both things come out across, right? You sort of see, are people out walking? Are they on the footpaths? Are they not? So it's both the personality and the environment.
Now,
and in some sense, yeah.
We've got about 5 minutes left, and we've actually got a really important issue to tackle in only maybe a short amount of time, because there's some conversation in the Twitterverse about this. One of the things that we're talking about is looking at an individual's feed versus what it's like if you're surveying, if you're looking at the signal in 10 billion tweets, for example. Yeah. So some people, when you talk about are we looking at individuals' feeds and their medical records and things like that, people are opting in. They're donating it willingly, knowingly. When you're looking at the Twitter API, this is Twitter's data, and they've handed it over. When you're looking at 10 billion tweets, what are you seeing about individuals?
Very little about individuals. The individuals come through mostly when we actually ask them to share their Facebook posts, and say for pregnant women, it's going to be you have to opt in. Who gets to see it? What can you share with it? What's going to be done? Obviously, for suicide prevention, there have been a number of false steps where good organizations said, oh, we'll just monitor for suicide and let people know. Like, oh, right, people don't want to know. So I think they're very different. One is to monitor community, which there's no danger of privacy that I see. For individuals, then it's got to be very much on a who do you want to see it, who do you want it shared with. We're not going to find you look depressed, April, based on your Twitter feed and tell your friends that you're depressed, and so that's not something that we're going to do without express permission.
Now, let's be clear, you're not going to do it.
Yep.
Someone could do it.
Yep.
And so the situation quite simply is, and I feel like I want to have this moment of clarity with the audience, which is the fact that this social media data is public, and Dr. Lyle Unger and the World Wellbeing Project isn't interested in individual data sets that people aren't sort of blessing that they look at. And when they're looking at stuff like from the Twitter API, it's very, very large, and sort of it's a very pulled back view. But do be clear that this data is public. And if you don't bless using it, maybe Dr. Lyle Unger's lab or a very responsible lab might not use it, but someone else is using it to sell you stuff on Amazon.
All the time. People get upset at Facebook for having tweaked the feeds in one way, but they're tweaking it every day in 1,000 ways. Some making you better off, and some making you maybe buy things you don't really need. What can I say?
We're talking about like the applications for helping folks who are having really, really terrible mental pain, and finding ways to identify where the needs are and make sure that we're meeting the needs more effectively or intervening better in some way for the good of public health. But do be clear that this is public and other people are already using it. It's not abstract in the future. It's already occurring for people for commercial purposes doing this. This isn't maybe someone will look at it. People are already doing that.
Absolutely.
Okay. This is one of my like, we're all gonna in a very loving way speak the truth. Do you run into that a lot? I will say that folks, because understandably, folks who have mental health diagnoses or just mental health symptoms, whatever sort, and I don't think anybody never has a pain or symptom, but folks who might get a diagnosis are understandably sensitive to being sort of viewed that way, because there has been a real history of mistreatment of people's civil rights and discrimination and prejudice against them, and so that there is this very understandable anxiety about it. It also doesn't sort of fit the facts about the public nature of social media data, and so it's like in our field, we have to do this balancing act and be very sensitive to people's desire to have control over what's seen and what might be used towards them, because that's how it would feel. And also this sort of understanding that this is already publicly reviewable, and like that's the real, I don't know, that's what I keep running into when people are doing this kind of research, a very emotional reaction. And I didn't know if that was something you were saying.
Yeah, everybody is fairly sensitive and sensitized, I think appropriately so. What can be done, what's creepy, what's weird, what's in fact helpful. And I think that's something society we're still working out. My prediction is people are getting more and more public. Younger people are much less concerned than older people, but there's always some limit at which point you don't want to have certain information shared. And one thing I find striking is even though all your tweets are already public and out there, to summarize them and say, oh, you look like this sort of a person with this sort of a diagnosis, puts a totally different spectrum on it. Mm-hmm. Right? So the synthesized data feels different than the raw data, even though anybody could look through it and find it. So I think it's something just to be very sensitive, is to make sure that data are used for good and not for evil, and not without consent of people.
Well, I'm glad that you're doing it, but I just want everybody to be really clear within themselves that the data is already being used for lots of purposes. It's not a question of whether or not the data exists and it's being used towards you individually. The question is it going to be used for good too? I think. I mean, for me, are we going to make sure that the really fabulous researchers who are working on behalf of the mental well-being of our communities, are they going to be able to use it too? Because the issue is not, is it going to be used? The issue is, are we going to let those folks use it? But
I'm with you.
Bart's making faces at me. Go ahead, Bart.
I think that I'm just watching the feed because we're down to the last 5 minutes. I mean, this is just it's just flown by. And just watching the feed, this has generated so much discussion. I think, Lyle, what you're doing is so important. I think more and more of the science is telling us that environment explains more of human behavior than anything else, right? And that we need to really start attending to the environment. When I saw Dan Buettner present on Blue Zones at National Council a couple years ago, it absolutely blew my mind how important environment, social connections were to health and wellness. And that, in fact, when we look at fatality rates, not just suicide, but all fatality rates, community has a huge role in how well people live, and well people live longer. And I think regardless of the reason that folks die, sometimes it's suicide, sometimes it's cancer, sometimes it's heart disease, but wellness and our environment play a huge role in that. And the sorts of things that you are looking at, and the computer language scientists, it's game changing, and that and I think everybody's starting to recognizing that this is happening. I'm going to comment on the privacy issue because I think both things are true at the same time. I find it interesting that people get worked up about all this data stuff, but every time you like something on Facebook, you've basically given permission for them to rape your personal data, right? Nobody's freaking out about that, but when somebody actually does something good with data to learn more about people, people start getting a little sensitive, and I understand that. But in this day and age, what your digital footprint, as Dr. Foreman talks about, our digital human behavior fossil record, you're leaving a print everywhere you go, and people can see those prints. And if we can use that data to help improve people's lives, then I say let's fucking do it. How about that?
Let's fucking do it. I like that. We're in the last few minutes where we do final thoughts, and I always, as a courtesy, to give everybody a minute to collect themselves, go first. Want to talk a little bit about my final thought for the show. Then I thought we'd check in with Bart, and then you, fabulous Dr. Lyle Unger. So my final thought for all of this is that people are using social media data to understand us as individuals and as a population better. I really want that understanding to be in the hands of folks who are interested in our population's health and well-being, because if this much has already been done, what Dr. Unger's talking about has already been done. So the final thought is, how can we get data so that Dr. Unger and folks like him who are working on our behalf can do more and bigger in the service of preventing suicide and improving mental well-being?
I'm going to say that thank you. Help would be great. What do we know? Positive, good relationships, communities, both the physical environment and equally, more importantly, the social environment are what makes people and communities flourish. And when people are engaged with a feeling of meaning in their life with strong friends and supports, far less likely to commit suicide. That's what we want to engineer. To try and understand that better, then, we need more measurement. This is being used already to sell you lots of nice products and things you may need or may not need. And I love Amazon. I buy everything there. It's great. They know my every next desire. But I would love to have that level of understanding of different communities, particularly people at risk for suicide, to know what is the things that places the interventions will be most helpful. So measurement is key for improving things, and this is something we can measure, is people's mental well-being and relationships.
And Dr. Bart Anders, bring us home.
I just want to say thank you, Lyle, for all the work that you're doing. I think the emphasis that you're putting on environment and community and wellness, I really think that that's where the future is, not in an illness medical-based model, but when we're talking about wellness and communities and health, those things go together, and your research shows that. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being on the show. It was absolutely fantastic.
Awesome. Thank you. You guys are so much fun.
Tony, you rejoined us. Any final thoughts?
Not a thing. I wouldn't want to make the show run long, but wow, what a feed! What a great guest Lyle was. We knew this was going to be wonderful when we saw him at CL Psych, and it was just as good as I'd hoped.
Thank you.
So you've had another evening with us. Remember, this week I want you to follow hashtags VA Brain Trust, because you're going to see a whole bunch of stuff about technology, innovation, social media, data science, mental health. And follow hashtag Zero Suicide. There's going to be a fabulous Zero Suicide conference in Missouri this week. Additionally, want to make you aware, we had a lot of folks from different communities on the feed tonight. Some who are loss survivors, some people with lived experience of suicide attempt, different feelings about what language can or should be used. I want you to keep discussing that, because I think the discussion is important. I think what is even more important is that we were all here tonight to become more educated about this in the service of mental wellness for all of our communities. Thank you so much, Dr. Unger, for being with us, and everyone have a good week.
Awesome. Thank you.